Hey, it's Pastor Kurt. I am here with the Pastor to Parent episode about the Good Samaritan from Luke 10, verses 25 through 37. This parable is well known. In fact, it's so well known that the word Samaritan has been changed, really, in terms of its meaning. In the English language, it means, in a sense, what Jesus meant it to mean in his telling of this parable, this story. It is a story about compassion. It's about a person who is a surprising hero of the story. And why is the Samaritan the hero of the story? Well, because he saw a person suffering, and he didn't let anything get in the way of helping to meet that need. The text in the story, Jesus says that the Samaritan felt pity. The Greek word for pity is a word that describes the guts. I'm going to step back here. The guts way down, deep, that you feel. It's like you see someone suffering and you just get socked in the gut. I don't know if you've had any experience of that. Most likely you have, where you've seen someone going through a difficult time, and you feel it as if it's happening to you. And that led the Samaritan to show mercy, to expend himself, and he really risked himself. There's a lot of risk associated with what the Samaritan did. The person who was beaten and left half dead, it might have been a plant, for robbers to basically then to descend upon that person and rob him too. It could have been that he could have caught a disease or something from that. Now, there are some negative examples in the story as well, and those are well known as too. They are both religious people, a priest and a Levite. These are proper religious folks, and they had good religious reasons, according to Jewish law, to not associate or touch what might be a dead body. They didn't know if he's left half dead, as the text says. He might have been a dead body, and there were rules about ritual cleanness or uncleanness on that. So I think if you take it deeper, first level it's about mercy. It's about ministering and helping people ministering to them who have needs. And there's so many general ways that you can go into this and engage in this conversation with your children. I encourage you to do it at that level. Because kids need to know that. In your family, you need to develop that sense of mercy, and I encourage you to go forward with that. There's two other levels, though, that you might want to think about, and both of them are a little bit more at an adult level. Some of your older kids might be able to engage in this. The first one has to do with the fact that the whole story arises out of a conversation where Jesus basically says what God wants you to do is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. In a sense, when you look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, the priest and the Levite are loving God exclusively without letting that love translate to the neighbor. They are concerned about their holiness, which is an important part of loving God, of respecting God, of showing reverence for God. But it's keeping them from doing the other part. They're stopping short of expressing their love for other people, a way of taking God's love. And what happens as we are in relationship with Holy God and letting that translate into loving and merciful actions toward others. And the Samaritan is a person who basically does what God wants to be done when we come across someone who is in need. And yet the Samaritan was someone who wasn't looked at as holy. They wouldn't be looked at as someone who was doing a very good job of loving God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So Jesus really comes down and says, this love of neighbor thing, it's a real thing. God really cares about that. And if you ever find yourself following a certain way of spirituality, prayer life, contemplative prayer, meditation, that takes you away from the needs of the world, that you should think about that, and that might cause things to be out of balance. The third dimension of this is along the lines of the Good Samaritan. We all know it. We all know what Jesus is trying to say, but actually doing what he's asking us to do is completely another story. So this particular parable, because you're talking about meeting someone who is in need, that where you might be at risk in being the one to help them, and crossing that boundary, that barrier of fear. Back in the 1980s, when the AIDS epidemic started, I know that many people looked at the parable of the Good Samaritan to be very challenging to the Christian community about ministering to people who had the AIDS virus, because in that time there was a lot of fear, and I think well-founded fear, because we didn't understand HIV as much as we do now. Fear that by helping them that you would contract that disease, and so I think the whole Christian community found themselves in a place where they were challenged. Are we willing to risk ourselves in order to help that person along the road, to show mercy to them? To look at it in this era of COVID-19, Jesus might tell the story and say, well, there was a person who was alone, suffering from the symptoms of COVID-19, and they needed someone to help them. But the person who would help them might be exposed to the virus. And so the first person who came by said, I have a business, and it's really important for me to keep that business going, so I'm going to leave it to someone else to help that person who has COVID-19. The next person might say, hey, I have a family, I have some little kids at home, I can't be the one to help that person because other people are counting on me. And everyone goes by and passes by that person with COVID-19 and doesn't help them because of fear of getting the disease. Now that is really challenging, and it's also very contemporary, isn't it?